What if Atlantis did not fall in a single moment, but slowly, over the course of one ordinary day that seemed calm, warm, and harmless? This story follows one quiet day in the legendary city of Atlantis, from its first pale morning light to the deep night when the sea finally remembers what was promised to it. There are no heroes here, no battles, no warnings shouted aloud. Only stone, water, routine, and time moving forward without mercy. Now let the day begin. The morning in Atlantis began without urgency. Soft light filtered through the high crystal towers, bending gently as it passed through layers of polished stone and translucent walls. The city rested beneath this light as if it had always been there, eternal and unmoving, balanced perfectly between sky and sea. Water flowed everywhere. It moved through channels carved into white marble streets, slipped beneath bridges shaped like open hands, and circled the foundations of buildings with patient familiarity. The sea was not distant in Atlantis, it was present in every breath, every reflection, every quiet sound. The city woke slowly. Tall structures rose in concentric rings from the central hill, their surfaces smooth and pale, etched with patterns so old that no one remembered their original meaning. Gardens clung to terraces and rooftops, heavy with green leaves darkened by salt air. Long shadows stretched across courtyards where fountains whispered steadily, unchanged for centuries. At the heart of Atlantis stood the great stone platform, broad and circular, its surface worn flat by generations of careful steps. Beneath it, unseen chambers held mechanisms that regulated water levels, temperature, and flow, systems built long ago, maintained out of tradition rather than necessity. Everything still worked. It always had. The air carried a faint mineral scent, mixed with the sweetness of flowering vines. Above, seabirds traced slow arcs through the sky, their cries distant and unhurried. Below, the sea pressed gently against the outer walls, its surface calm, reflecting the city as if admiring its own creation. No one noticed anything unusual. The water channels ran as they always did. The fountains did not change their rhythm. The stones beneath the streets remained warm from the previous day, holding on to heat like memory. Even the deepest structures beneath the city were silent, resting in the balance they had held for longer than history could recall. Yet far below, beyond the foundations, beyond the carved supports and ancient barriers, the sea shifted almost imperceptibly. Pressure changed by a fraction. A slow movement passed through the deep, not violent, not sudden, only inevitable. The kind of movement that never announces itself until it is already too late to matter. Above it all, Atlantis continued its morning, unaware that the day had already begun to belong to the ocean. As the sun climbed higher, Atlantis settled fully into motion. Water became the dominant sound of the city, not loud, not demanding, but constant. It slipped along stone channels with practiced ease, curved around corners smoothed by centuries of flow, and spilled softly into shallow basins where light broke into trembling patterns. The movement of water defined the rhythm of the morning more than any clock ever could. The outer canals reflected the sky in long, narrow strips of blue, interrupted only by bridges that arched gracefully from ring to ring. Beneath these arches, the water darkened slightly, cooler and slower, holding faint traces of shadow. Small ripples spread outward as currents adjusted themselves, responding to changes too subtle to be noticed at the surface. The stones lining the canals were pale and warm, fitted so precisely that no seam interrupted their surface. In some places, faint lines glimmered within the rock itself, mineral veins that once guided energy through the city. Their glow was softer now, barely visible, yet still present, still functioning as designed. Gardens along the inner ring stirred in the light breeze drifting in from the sea. Leaves trembled gently, brushing against one another with a dry, whispering sound. Flowers opened slowly, their colors muted and calm, chosen long ago for harmony rather than beauty. Even the insects moved lazily, drifting between blossoms without urgency. The water systems beneath the city adjusted continuously. Valves turned by fractions, pressure redistributed through chambers carved deep into the bedrock, and ancient channels compensated for minute shifts in flow. These corrections had once been overseen carefully, but now they occurred automatically, guided by mechanisms that had outlived their creators. For a brief moment, deep below the central platform, one channel accepted slightly more water than intended. The excess was insignificant, a change measured in drops, not streams. It passed unnoticed as it joined the broader circulation, dispersing quietly through the network. Stone absorbed the coolness, metal joints adjusted, and balance returned, or seemed to. Above ground, sunlight reflected more sharply off the canals, creating patterns that danced across walls and ceilings. The city appeared serene, preserved in an endless present. From a distance, Atlantis looked less like a place of living stone and more like an idea, perfect, symmetrical, untouched by decay. Beyond the outer walls, the sea remained calm. Its surface barely stirred, yet far below, currents pressed inward, testing boundaries that had resisted them for generations. Pressure accumulated slowly, evenly, without violence. The sea did not rush. It waited, confident in time. The day moved forward, carrying Atlantis with it, unaware that the flow of water, once its greatest strength, had begun to lean, ever so slightly, toward the deep. By late morning, light rested heavily on Atlantis. The sun stood high enough to remove most shadows, pressing brightness directly onto stone and water alike. Surfaces gleamed softly, not blinding, but steady, a calm, even illumination that revealed every curve and channel without drama. The city appeared complete, finished, as though nothing more could ever be added or taken away. Beneath the streets, the weight of the city settled deeper into its foundations. Massive stone supports descended into the seabed, shaped and positioned with extraordinary precision. They carried not only the physical weight of towers and platforms, but also the accumulated certainty of centuries. Atlantis had stood here longer than memory could organize into dates. The stone trusted itself. Deep chambers beneath the central ring remained cool and dark. Water flowed through them in controlled silence, guided by smooth walls and carefully angled passages. The sound was low and constant, more vibration than noise, like a breath held indefinitely. At the lowest level, where carved stone met natural rock, fine particles shifted almost imperceptibly. Sediment pressed inward under the influence of distant currents. The movement was slow enough to feel like stillness, yet it never truly stopped. Stone responded by settling, adjusting its balance by fractions too small to register above. A thin seam formed along one of the deepest joints. It did not crack. It did not break. It simply widened by the smallest measurable amount, enough to allow a different kind of pressure to exist on either side. Cold seeped through, carried by water older and heavier than the flows above. The mechanisms designed to respond to imbalance detected nothing outside their acceptable range. Above ground, the city remained undisturbed. Water in the canals shimmered faintly, their surfaces smooth and mirror-like. Bridges cast gentle arcs of reflection, bending the light into quiet patterns that drifted lazily downstream. The air grew warmer, thickened slightly by the rising sun, and the scent of stone and salt deepened. The sea birds had grown quieter now, resting on ledges and high points along the outer ring. Their stillness blended into the city's calm, as though even motion had decided to pause for the day. Beyond the walls, the sea appeared unchanged. Yet beneath its surface, weight pressed downward and inward, not as force, but as certainty. Water accumulated where it had never needed to before, testing the patience of stone that had never learned how to fail. Atlantis stood unknowing above it all, balanced on foundations that were still strong, but no longer perfectly aligned. The day continued, calm and luminous, unaware that gravity itself had begun to choose a direction. At noon, Atlantis grew unusually quiet. The sun rested at its highest point, flattening shadows until they nearly disappeared. Stone streets seemed wider under this light, their pale surfaces absorbing warmth without resistance. Water in the canals slowed, not in movement but in appearance, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where air ended and water began. The city appeared suspended in time. Fountains continued their steady circulation, but their sound softened, blending into a single, distant murmur. The usual play of reflections along walls and ceilings became subdued, as if the light itself had grown tired of movement. Even the breeze from the sea weakened, leaving the air heavy and still. Below the surface, the balance shifted again. Water pressure deep beneath the central platform increased by a narrow margin. It was not enough to trigger release channels or adjustment mechanisms, yet it altered the way stone bore weight. Microscopic fractures, ancient, sealed long ago, accepted new stress, reopening just enough to remember that they existed. Cold spread through the lowest chambers. It moved slowly upward, absorbed by layers of stone that resisted it out of habit rather than strength. Metal components contracted slightly, their responses precise yet insufficient. The systems of Atlantis had been built to endure change, but not to question permanence. On the surface, heat shimmered faintly above the streets. The gardens along the terraces drooped just slightly, leaves heavy with warmth. Water collected at the edges of basins a fraction longer than usual before flowing onward. These were not faults, only variations, the kind that could be dismissed as the natural rhythm of a living city. Beyond the outer ring, the sea rested in near-perfect calm. Its surface was smooth, almost glass-like, reflecting the sky in uninterrupted blue. No wave struck the walls with force. No storm gathered at the horizon. The ocean did not threaten. It observed. Far below, pressure continued to rise. Stone compressed, sediment shifted, and ancient boundaries accepted the sea's presence without protest. The difference between holding and yielding grew smaller, narrowing into something too subtle to feel, too quiet to fear. At noon, Atlantis remained whole. Nothing cracked. Nothing fell. Nothing warned. The city stood complete beneath the sun, unaware that stillness itself had become the most dangerous sign. As the sun began its slow descent, Atlantis entered the gentlest part of the day. Light softened, losing its sharp edges as it angled across the city. Shadows returned gradually, stretching thin lines along stairways and colonnades. The temperature eased, and stone released the heat it had gathered, warming the air just enough to feel comforting rather than heavy. Water responded first. In the inner canals, the flow altered by a barely visible degree. Ripples lingered longer along the edges, hesitating before continuing onward. At certain bends, reflections distorted slightly, bending lines that had always appeared straight. These changes were small enough to be overlooked, small enough to seem imagined. Below the streets, a deep channel accepted more pressure than designed. The stone lining its walls held firm, but the force behind it redistributed, searching for balance. A secondary passage opened momentarily, allowing a thin surge of colder water to move upward before dispersing. The adjustment reduced strain in one place while increasing it elsewhere. The city's systems adapted, but only partially. Ancient regulators, calibrated for a world that no longer existed, compensated within familiar limits. They corrected for imbalance without understanding its source. Stability returned, yet it felt thinner, stretched across a broader area. On the surface, water collected briefly at the base of a bridge in the second ring. The accumulation was minor, a shallow pooling that vanished as the flow corrected itself. Stone darkened for a moment, then dried again. No trace remained, except a faint coolness absorbed into the marble. Beyond the walls, the sea shifted its weight. The movement was slow, patient, and directional. Currents pressed inward at depths untouched by light, meeting resistance that had weakened just enough to respond. The ocean did not push harder. It did not need to. Atlantis remained calm. Gardens rustled softly as the breeze returned, carrying salt air through the terraces. Light reflected warmly from water and stone, painting the city in tones of gold and pale blue. Everything appeared balanced, restored, and whole. Yet beneath that appearance, the first true imbalance had already passed. The day continued, unaware that correction had begun to favor the sea. Afternoon settled gently over Atlantis. The sun lowered toward the horizon, and light grew warmer, thicker, clinging to surfaces instead of passing through them. Long shadows stretched across plazas and walkways, emphasizing curves and elevations that had always been present but rarely noticed. The city appeared to relax, easing into the later hours of the day. Beneath that calm, the balance leaned. The deepest supports absorbed increasing pressure from below. Stone did not fail, but it responded, compressing slightly, adjusting its posture as any structure under weight must do. The change was uniform enough to escape detection, spread evenly through layers designed to distribute force. Water followed the path of least resistance. In the lowest chambers, colder currents pressed upward, finding seams softened by time. They did not break through, but they remained, held in place by barriers now working harder than before. The sound of water deep below lowered in tone, shifting from a steady flow to something heavier, slower. Above, the canals reflected amber light. Their surfaces rippled gently, catching fragments of sky and architecture in motion. At certain points, the waterline rose by a fraction, enough to darken the stone just above its usual mark. The change remained subtle, temporary, and easily dismissed. The outer ring felt the shift most clearly. The sea rested closer to the walls, its surface lifted by forces far beneath. Waves still arrived softly, but they lingered a moment longer before retreating. Salt traced thin lines along the base of the stone, marks that blended into patterns already worn by time. Far below, sediment continued to move. The seabed adjusted under the city's weight, compacting unevenly as pressure accumulated. The foundation of Atlantis responded by settling not downward, but inward, a slow, collective lean that changed nothing visibly, yet altered everything structurally. The city remained serene. Light drifted through the gardens, catching on leaves and water alike. The air cooled pleasantly, carrying the quiet promise of evening. No sound suggested urgency. No surface revealed danger. Atlantis stood as it always had, unaware that gravity, water, and stone had begun to agree on a different future. As afternoon edged closer to evening, Atlantis began to resist. The stone that formed the city had endured centuries of pressure, erosion, and subtle change. It was shaped not only to carry weight, but to respond to it, distributing stress through curves, arches, and layered supports. Now, that resistance activated fully, holding the city steady through habit and design. Deep within the foundations, ancient barriers engaged. Channels narrowed slightly, redirecting water into secondary paths carved long ago for moments exactly like this. Pressure eased in one chamber and rose in another, spreading the strain across a wider area. The system worked as it always had, methodical and precise, unaware that the source of imbalance lay beyond its capacity to correct. The cold advanced slowly upward. It seeped into higher stone layers, cooling surfaces that had rarely known chill. Metal joints responded with faint contractions, tightening where they should have remained neutral. The city adapted, but the adaptations grew less efficient with each adjustment. On the surface, the canals remained calm. Water flowed smoothly, reflecting the deepening color of the sky. Gold shifted toward copper, then toward soft orange, stretching across the city in long bands of light. Bridges and towers cast extended shadows that overlapped and blended, softening the city's geometry. In a narrow passage near the outer ring, water brushed the stone more persistently than before. It was not flooding, only contact, a gentle, repeated touch where there had once been space. Stone darkened and lightened again as the water withdrew, leaving no lasting mark, only a sense of repetition. Beyond the walls, the sea pressed closer. Its surface rose almost imperceptibly, lifted by movements far below. The ocean did not rush or surge. It simply occupied more space, as it always eventually did. Atlantis held its ground. The city's resistance was quiet, patient, and dignified. Stone accepted pressure without complaint. Systems compensated without question. Balance was not restored, but delayed. The day moved onward, and with it, the certainty that resistance alone could not last forever. Evening light transformed Atlantis. The sun lowered toward the edge of the sea, and its glow softened into deep amber and muted rose. Stone that had once appeared pale now carried warmth and color, as if the city itself were absorbing the sky. Reflections stretched longer across the canals, trembling gently with the movement of water. Shadows deepened. They pooled beneath arches and along the bases of towers, emphasizing depth and height in equal measure. The city seemed larger in this light, its forms more pronounced, its presence more substantial. Nothing suggested fragility. Everything suggested endurance. Below the surface, endurance thinned. Water pressure continued to rise in the deepest chambers, no longer evenly distributed. Certain barriers held firm, while others bore more strain than intended. The ancient system adjusted again, redirecting flow through paths rarely used, awakening channels that had been dormant for generations. Cold reached higher. It touched stone closer to the surface, subtly altering the temperature of the canals above. Water at the edges felt denser, heavier, clinging to the stone before releasing. The difference was slight, perceptible only to the city itself. At the outer ring, the sea mirrored the sunset. Its surface glowed with shifting bands of color, calm and inviting. Waves lapped softly against the walls, leaving faint, wet traces that caught the light before fading. The ocean appeared peaceful, generous, almost reverent in its approach. Yet beneath that beauty, pressure continued to gather. Sediment shifted again under the city's weight, compacting unevenly. The foundations adjusted with it, settling deeper into the seabed by fractions too small to measure from above. The lean continued, slow and collective, aligning Atlantis more closely with the pull of the sea. On the surface, nothing broke. Water flowed. Stone stood. Light faded. The city welcomed evening as it always had, unaware that the changing light marked not just the end of day, but the beginning of surrender. As the sun touched the horizon, Atlantis seemed to inhale. The air cooled gradually, carrying the scent of salt more clearly through the streets and gardens. Warmth lifted from stone in slow waves, rising and dispersing like memory. The canals reflected deeper colors now, indigo, violet, and fading gold, their surfaces darkening as light withdrew. The sea responded to the cooling. Beyond the walls, its surface shifted almost imperceptibly, lifting and settling as deeper currents adjusted. Waves continued their gentle rhythm, but their timing changed slightly, arriving closer together, lingering longer before retreating. The ocean did not advance. It breathed. Below the city, pressure found new paths. A deep channel, long reinforced by layered stone, accepted more water than it had since the city's earliest days. The barrier held, but it flexed, redistributing force into surrounding supports. The adjustment sent a slow vibration through the foundations, too faint to rise above the constant sound of flowing water. Stone absorbed the movement. Its response was subtle, a collective tightening, a quiet alignment under stress. Joints pressed closer together, reducing spaces that had once allowed easy flow. Water slowed, thickened, and pooled briefly before continuing onward. On the surface, the canals appeared unchanged. Reflections of the darkening sky drifted smoothly, uninterrupted by disturbance. Bridges stood motionless, their silhouettes clean against the fading light. The city's geometry remained precise, unbroken. At the outer edge, the sea reached slightly higher along the walls. The water touched stone that had rarely known contact, leaving behind a cool sheen that caught the last traces of sunset. As the wave withdrew, the stone remained damp a moment longer than before. Night approached quietly. Lantern-like crystals embedded in the city's architecture began to glow faintly, their light soft and steady. They illuminated paths and edges without casting harsh shadows, preserving the city's calm. Atlantis exhaled. Yet beneath that calm breath, the sea waited, patient and attentive, aware that each breath brought the city closer to silence. Night settled over Atlantis without ceremony. The sky deepened into rich shades of blue, and the first stars appeared, faint and distant. Across the city, embedded crystals brightened gradually, responding to the absence of sunlight with a soft, even glow. Their light traced streets, bridges, and terraces, preserving form without disrupting darkness. The canals reflected this glow. Lines of pale light stretched across the water, trembling gently with the slow movement of current. The reflections made the canals appear deeper than they were, like narrow windows into another layer of the city. Below, the foundations continued to adjust. Pressure remained constant now, no longer rising sharply, but refusing to ease. Stone held, compressed into shapes more compact than before. The city's weight pressed downward and inward, aligning more closely with the contours of the seabed. In the deepest chambers, water pooled where it once flowed freely. The accumulation was slow and deliberate, contained by barriers designed to tolerate such moments. These spaces filled by degrees, altering circulation patterns above them. The system compensated, but with reduced efficiency, redirecting flow through longer, narrower routes. Cold crept upward again. It reached higher stone layers, cooling the canals from below. The difference was subtle, felt only as a faint density in the water, a heaviness that made ripples fade more quickly than usual. At the outer ring, the sea reflected the stars. Its surface appeared calm and dark, broken only by gentle movement along the walls. Waves brushed stone softly, leaving thin lines of moisture that caught the crystal light before vanishing. The city remained intact. Lights glowed steadily. Water flowed. Stone stood. Nothing collapsed. Nothing cracked. Yet the night had claimed Atlantis, and with it, the final hours of balance the city would ever know. Late night wrapped Atlantis in quiet. The city's crystal lights cast a serene glow over stone and water alike. Their soft illumination revealed every curve, every canal, every terrace, but it did not disturb the sense of stillness. Shadows lay thick in corners and under arches, yet they felt protective rather than ominous. The canals moved slowly. Water followed the same paths as always, but its pace had grown imperceptibly heavier. Reflections shimmered with a faint lag, bending lightly as though time itself had slowed. The flow, once lively, now carried a weight that went unnoticed on the surface. Beneath, pressure shifted in subtle waves. The deepest chambers absorbed small increases in force. Stone compressed, metal joints contracted, and water found new paths through passages that had lain dormant for centuries. The system responded mechanically, correcting as best it could, but never fully returning to equilibrium. Cold seeped further upward. It touched stone more directly, slightly chilling the canal's edges. The water here felt denser, slowing as it moved along marble channels and reflecting the soft crystal light above. The city itself seemed to sense the change, holding still in an almost conscious pause. Above, the gardens slept. Leaves drooped gently over terraces, flowers closed in muted surrender, and vines rested against walls. No breeze disturbed the delicate balance of petals and branches. The air smelled faintly of salt and stone, calm and consistent. The outer sea mirrored this calm. Its surface barely shifted, responding to deep currents that had grown stronger without producing waves. Water brushed the city walls lightly, leaving a transient sheen before returning to its quiet rhythm. The ocean waited, patient and measured, as if aware that time alone would prevail. Atlantis remained serene. Every canal, terrace, and tower reflected light and shadow with perfect order. The city appeared timeless, unchanging, and alive in its quiet. Yet beneath the calm, the foundations pressed inward, water pressed upward, and gravity whispered a promise the city could not hear. The night deepened, carrying the slow inevitability of what would come. In the stillness of midnight, Atlantis experienced the faintest tremor. It was not a shaking that could be felt by the inhabitants, nor a sound that traveled through the air. Instead, it passed silently through stone and water, a subtle shifting of weight that only the city itself could register. Foundations realigned imperceptibly, channels adjusted, and deep chambers accepted small variations in pressure. Water in the canals reflected the change. Ripples appeared briefly along edges where stone met water, then faded as the flow continued. In some areas, the current slowed for a heartbeat, then resumed its course as if nothing had occurred. The city absorbed the tremor without complaint. Deep below, the pressure had moved. Stone compressed further under the unseen weight of the sea. Tiny seams, long dormant, opened just enough to allow micro-shifts in water. These shifts were measured in fractions of an inch, yet they traveled upward, altering the delicate balance that had been maintained for centuries. Metal components contracted minutely. Joints and supports built long ago adjusted to accommodate the new stress. Each movement was calculated, precise, and entirely mechanical, no living mind directed the corrections. The city functioned as it always had, outliving its creators through design alone. On the surface, nothing seemed unusual. Canals glimmered under crystal light, reflecting faint starlight. Bridges and terraces remained steady, unbroken, and graceful. The air stayed cool, carrying only the scent of salt and stone. Shadows deepened in familiar patterns, unchanged by the subtle tremor below. Even the sea appeared calm. Beyond the walls, the water responded only with slight variations, undetectable to any observer. It waited, patient, knowing the day's end would eventually arrive. Atlantis remained whole, serene, and beautiful. Yet the tremor marked the beginning of an unspoken shift, a quiet herald that the city's perfect stillness could not last forever. As the night deepened toward the early hours before dawn, Atlantis absorbed the weight of time. The city seemed heavier somehow, not in mass but in presence. Every tower, arch, and terrace carried the memory of centuries, each stone pressing gently against its neighbor. Canals reflected the faint glow of crystals above, darkened slightly as if the water had grown denser. The rhythm of flow slowed, subtle enough to be mistaken for stillness. Below, the foundation bore more than stone alone. Water pressed upward in the deepest chambers, finding tiny gaps and distributing force unevenly. Sediment shifted, adjusting to the combined weight of sea and city. Channels that had long remained dormant accepted the pressure, holding it in quiet equilibrium. The mechanisms designed to correct imbalance worked efficiently but could not reverse the cumulative effect. Cold spread through layers of stone. It traveled upward slowly, touching walls and floors with a quiet insistence. Marble cooled, metal joints contracted further, and water in canals felt heavier, as if carrying the weight of history itself. The city seemed to sigh under the strain, though outwardly unchanged. On the surface, gardens slumbered under the faint glow of crystal lights. Leaves drooped slightly, petals remained closed, and vines rested against stone in silent surrender. Even the air moved less, stilling to a gentle pause, thick with the scent of salt and stone. The canals mirrored the sky, now deep indigo, with faint glimmers of star reflections shimmering across their surface. The outer sea responded subtly. Its surface remained smooth, almost motionless, yet deep currents pressed more insistently beneath. The ocean had not changed in appearance, but it had grown aware of the city's weight, adjusting patiently, waiting for the proper moment. Atlantis, serene above, was shifting imperceptibly below. Time alone guided the changes. The city continued to stand, reflecting light, water, and stone with perfect calm. Yet the foundation beneath it quietly reminded that permanence is an illusion, and even a city built for eternity must eventually respond to the world around it. Just before the first light of dawn, Atlantis seemed to listen. The night had deepened to its quietest hour, when the air itself carried no movement. Canals mirrored the faint starlight, still and reflective, as if holding their breath. Stone terraces glimmered under crystal illumination, and gardens remained motionless, draped in shadow and stillness. Beneath the city, the sea whispered. Pressure in the deepest channels shifted slightly, sending subtle waves through the foundations. Stone compressed imperceptibly, metal joints responded, and water adjusted to new paths carved long ago. The city's mechanisms worked automatically, correcting minor imbalances without comprehension. The canals absorbed the change silently. Flow slowed by a fraction, ripples lingering a heartbeat longer before moving onward. Marble darkened slightly at the edges, reflecting a subtle density in the water. The adjustments were invisible to the eye, yet they carried significance that only time could reveal. Cold continued its ascent. It crept through stone layers, touching walls and floors, chilling canals in its quiet way. Water felt heavier, slower, more deliberate, though nothing seemed amiss to the city above. Outside the walls, the sea moved gently. Its surface remained calm, smooth as glass, but deep currents pressed against the seabed beneath Atlantis. They moved without haste, patient and deliberate, testing the city's foundations with silent persistence. The ocean knew the weight it carried, and it knew that patience often outweighs force. Atlantis stood still and serene. Every terrace, tower, and canal appeared perfect under the crystal glow. The city remained whole, beautiful, and calm, yet beneath its surface, the ocean had begun to assert a quiet presence that time alone would allow to grow. The night held the city in delicate balance. And in this stillness, the first hints of inevitability were felt, not in sight, sound, or movement, but in the very essence of stone and water working together, aware that nothing lasts forever. Dawn arrived slowly, brushing Atlantis with a gentle glow. The sky shifted from deep indigo to soft purples and muted gold, spreading color across towers, terraces, and gardens. Light caught the edges of canals, igniting fleeting sparkles on the water's surface. The city appeared untouched, as if night had been only a quiet pause, a breath held in preparation for the day. Canals reflected the changing sky. Water moved with a subtle grace, rippling gently, carrying faint echoes of night's weight. The flow seemed slower, deliberate, as if acknowledging the day ahead. Marble edges glimmered faintly under the soft light, cool yet inviting, blending shadow and reflection. Beneath, the foundations remained vigilant. Pressure in the deepest channels persisted, now slightly higher than before. Stone adjusted minutely, metal joints contracted and expanded, and sediment shifted in measured response. The city's mechanisms corrected automatically, but only within limits, distributing imbalance without restoring true equilibrium. Cold lifted from stone slowly. Layers near the surface warmed under the first rays, and the water in canals responded in kind. A sense of freshness spread through the city, carrying with it the quiet promise of movement and continuity. Yet the subtle weight of the previous night lingered, imperceptible but present. Above, gardens opened slightly to the light. Leaves caught the sun, tilting upward with gentle care. Flowers revealed soft colors, muted pastels in harmony with the stone and water. Vines stretched lazily along terraces, reflecting light and shadow in measured rhythm. Life continued as it always had, undisturbed by the whispers below. The sea beyond the outer walls mirrored the dawn. Its surface glowed faintly with amber reflections, calm and measured. Deep currents continued their subtle pressure, moving with a patient insistence that would not be denied. The ocean did not yet demand, but it had begun to claim its role in the unfolding day. Atlantis remained serene. Stone, water, and light appeared perfect. The city continued to function as though eternal, unaware that the ocean and foundations were quietly negotiating the day's inevitable outcome. And so, the morning began, calm, luminous, and waited with silent anticipation. Morning unfolded in Atlantis with a deliberate calm. Sunlight stretched across canals, terraces, and towers, bathing each surface in soft, golden warmth. Shadows moved slowly, barely perceptible, elongating and fading as the light shifted. The city seemed to breathe lightly with the day, as if aware only of its own presence and nothing beyond. Below, the foundations responded. Pressure deep within the seabed had grown gradually overnight, and stone adjusted in kind. Supports compressed imperceptibly, channels flexed under hidden water, and mechanisms redistributed flow to maintain stability. Every change was subtle, invisible above ground, yet essential to the balance of the city. Water in the canals reflected the soft light. Ripples flowed with delicate hesitation, moving around corners and across surfaces with a grace that seemed almost intentional. Marble edges glimmered faintly as currents brushed past them, carrying with them the quiet memory of pressure below. The effect was unnoticed, yet the city absorbed it entirely. Cold lingered in the lower chambers. It had crept upward through the previous night, leaving canals slightly denser than before. Now, it eased gently as the sun warmed surfaces, yet the shift was measured and deliberate. Water responded slowly, floating along paths that had been shaped centuries earlier, aware only of the smallest variations. Above, the gardens stirred quietly. Leaves and petals seemed to sense the morning warmth, lifting ever so slightly. Vines stretched along walls and terraces, tracing curves and angles in harmony with the architecture. Flowers opened gently, their muted colors blending into stone, water, and light, creating a tapestry of quiet elegance. The sea beyond Atlantis remained calm. Its surface reflected the sky's changing hues, smooth and undisturbed, yet deep currents continued their silent work beneath the seabed. The ocean's wake pressed subtly, testing boundaries without revealing itself. It did not hurry, it only existed, patient and persistent. Atlantis appeared flawless. Stone, water, and light held their familiar forms, flawless to any observer. Yet beneath the calm, foundations shifted, water responded, and the city adapted in silence to forces unseen. The gentle shift continued, unnoticed, but inexorable. As morning deepened into midday, Atlantis maintained its serene rhythm. Canals shimmered with sunlight, reflecting the pale gold and soft blues of the sky. Water moved steadily along marble edges, rippling lightly, carrying both reflection and memory in equal measure. The city's surface appeared unchanged, flawless in its calm. Beneath, the pulse of pressure persisted. The deepest channels shifted imperceptibly, sending faint vibrations through stone and metal alike. Supports adjusted minutely, accommodating forces that had gathered overnight. Sediment beneath the foundations redistributed subtly, moving in a pattern too slow to be noticed by any observer above. Cold touched the lower levels again. It crept through hidden chambers, altering the density of water in channels below the surface. Marble and stone absorbed the chill, responding with imperceptible contraction. The city continued to adjust, its systems functioning mechanically, faithfully, without awareness. Above, the terraces and gardens mirrored tranquility. Leaves swayed slightly in the warm breeze, vines stretched with gentle intent, and flowers tilted toward sunlight in slow, deliberate motion. The air carried the soft scent of salt and stone, mingling with faint floral notes. The city's life remained uninterrupted, serene in its order. The sea beyond the walls remained still. Its surface reflected the sky and the city in smooth continuity, unbroken by waves. Yet deep currents pressed outward, reaching the edges of Atlantis' foundations with patient insistence. The ocean moved not with urgency, but with certainty, testing the city's endurance in silence. The pulse continued below. Stone flexed, channels redirected water, and the entire city functioned as if it were alive, responding automatically, preserving balance while gradually leaning toward the unseen pressure. Everything above remained flawless, serene, eternal in appearance. Atlantis persisted in calm dignity. The city continued its day without disturbance, unaware of the slow pulse beneath it, a heartbeat of stone, water, and time, marking the inevitable changes to come. As the sun crossed its zenith, Atlantis basked in gentle light. Stone surfaces glowed softly, and canals reflected the brightness in delicate patterns. Water flowed evenly, rippling only where it met stone edges or terraces. The city seemed suspended, perfect and calm, a harmony of stone, water, and air. Below, subtle changes accumulated. Pressure deep within the seabed pressed inward, unnoticed above. Stone compressed imperceptibly, supports shifted minutely, and hidden channels carried water along paths rarely used. The adjustments were precise, mechanical, and continuous, ensuring that the city remained intact, yet slowly leaning toward a new equilibrium dictated by the ocean itself. Cold lingered in lower chambers. It altered the density of water slightly, slowing the current along hidden paths. Marble absorbed the chill, metals contracted subtly, and the city's mechanisms compensated, redistributing force to maintain balance. Each shift was unnoticeable above ground, yet essential to the survival of the structure. On the surface, life continued serenely. Terraces and gardens thrived in soft sunlight. Leaves swayed lightly, flowers tilted to the warmth, and vines traced gentle arcs along walls and balustrades. The air was filled with the scent of salt, stone, and greenery, creating a sense of calm that pervaded the entire city. The sea reflected a sky of gold and blue. Its surface remained smooth, almost mirror-like, while deep currents pressed quietly beneath, testing the foundations. The ocean moved not violently, but patiently, waiting for time to complete what it could not force. Atlantis held its form. Every canal, bridge, and tower remained flawless. Above ground, the city seemed eternal, unaffected by the subtle pressures below. Yet the quiet edge of imbalance had arrived, imperceptible but present, nudging the city ever so slowly toward the day's inevitable conclusion. Afternoon in Atlantis carried a quiet weight. Sunlight shifted toward warm amber tones, spilling across stone surfaces and sparkling canals. Shadows lengthened gradually, wrapping around terraces and arches with soft, deliberate edges. The city appeared unchanged, serene, as though the day had been crafted for endless tranquility. Beneath, the foundations bore more than before. Pressure pressed inward from the seabed, transmitted through stone and sediment alike. Supports flexed imperceptibly, channels redirected water in hidden paths, and metal joints contracted in response to forces too subtle to notice above ground. Every mechanism worked precisely, distributing weight while concealing the strain. Water in the canals moved with a slower grace. Currents hesitated at corners, ripples stretched across surfaces, and reflections seemed to linger longer. Marble edges darkened momentarily under the pressure, absorbing its effect and returning it in gentle waves. The change was imperceptible to anyone walking the streets, yet it shifted the city's rhythm ever so slightly. Cold remained in the lower chambers. It crept upward with measured persistence, chilling hidden corridors and channels. Water carried the density upward, subtly altering flow without disrupting continuity. The city responded automatically, preserving outward calm even as internal adjustments grew more demanding. Above ground, gardens swayed lightly. Leaves and flowers shifted gently in the soft breeze, tracing arcs along terraces and walls. The air carried the mingled sense of salt, stone, and greenery, reinforcing the sense of stability and quiet. Light and shadow played in harmony, unbroken by any visible change. The sea outside mirrored calm. Its surface remained smooth, reflecting gold and blue as if to reassure the city. Yet beneath, currents pressed against foundations with measured insistence, patient and unhurried. Atlantis floated above, unaware of the quiet descent it was experiencing. The city remained whole, flawless, and serene. Stillness reigned on the surface, but below, stone, water, and metal continued their subtle negotiation, marking the slow, inevitable leaning of Atlantis toward the ocean's embrace. Late afternoon deepened the calm of Atlantis. The city glowed softly under a waning sun, stone and water basking in the gentle amber light. Canals reflected towers and terraces, their surfaces smooth and unbroken. Shadows stretched lazily, wrapping the streets and gardens in a serene embrace. The city seemed suspended in a quiet eternity. Below ground, the silent work continued. Deep channels carried more water than usual, flowing into areas long unused. Stone compressed slowly, metal joints adjusted, and sediment shifted imperceptibly beneath the foundations. The mechanisms of Atlantis functioned automatically, distributing pressure without awareness, preserving outward calm while internal forces realigned. Water rippled subtly in the canals. Edges darkened momentarily as currents moved more deliberately. Reflections lingered longer, bending light in subtle, almost imperceptible waves. The flow remained constant, yet the change beneath the surface left a trace in every ripple, every shimmer. Cold persisted in the lower levels. It crept upward slowly, touching stone and water with a quiet insistence. Canals felt denser, channels carried heavier water, and marble absorbed the subtle chill, distributing it across the city without disrupting its outward serenity. Above ground, gardens and terraces appeared unchanged. Leaves swayed gently, vines stretched along walls, and flowers opened slightly to catch the light. The air carried the mingled scent of salt, stone, and greenery, reinforcing the sense of balance and tranquility. Light, shadow, and reflection moved together in perfect harmony. The sea beyond the walls remained calm. Its smooth surface reflected the city and sky, masking the persistent pressure beneath. Currents continued their patient work, pressing quietly against foundations without alerting any observer. The ocean moved with certainty, knowing that time alone would achieve what force could not. Atlantis remained flawless, serene, and timeless above ground. Yet below, stone, water, and sediment negotiated silently, carrying the city slowly toward an inevitable shift that would not be noticed until it was complete. As the sun sank lower, Atlantis absorbed the subtle transition into evening. Light softened into muted golds and pale oranges, washing terraces, towers, and canals with gentle warmth. Shadows grew longer and merged, enveloping gardens and walkways in a calm embrace. Everything appeared unchanged, flawless in its serene rhythm. Beneath the city, hidden adjustments persisted. Pressure deep within the seabed pressed steadily, unseen but insistent. Stone compressed ever so slightly, channels redirected water along ancient paths, and metal components flexed in near imperceptible movements. The city's mechanisms responded automatically, maintaining outward perfection while internal alignment shifted subtly. Water in the canals moved with an almost imperceptible change. Ripples slowed in their course, reflections lingered, and edges darkened faintly as the denser flow brushed marble surfaces. The motion above ground seemed normal, yet the city felt an intangible heaviness, like a quiet understanding that something impermanent persisted below. Cold lingered beneath the foundations. It touched the stone and water gradually, carrying a subtle weight upward, altering the movement of currents in deep channels. The chill was measured, calm, and persistent, unnoticed by the city yet affecting its hidden veins. Above, gardens and terraces remained tranquil. Leaves and flowers continued their slow, deliberate movements in the evening light. Vines traced arches and walls, responding to warmth and shadow. The air carried salt, stone, and greenery in harmony, reinforcing the sense of serene order. Beyond the city walls, the sea mirrored the sky. Its surface remained calm and reflective, while deep currents pressed against the city's foundations with quiet patience. The ocean moved with purpose, invisible to the eye, yet steadily influencing the balance of Atlantis. The city appeared perfect. Canals, stone, light, and gardens held their familiar forms, flawless to any observer. Yet beneath the calm, the faint shift continued, invisible, inevitable, and unstoppable. Evening deepened over Atlantis, and the city seemed to settle into itself. Golden light softened into pale amber, spilling across towers, terraces, and canals. Reflections shimmered lightly on the water's surface, tracing the curves of stone and the slow swaying of vines. Shadows lengthened, pooling beneath arches and bridges, creating a quiet rhythm of light and dark that spoke of timelessness. Beneath the surface, pressure persisted. Water in deep chambers pressed subtly against walls, redistributing force across stone and sediment. Supports flexed imperceptibly, channels carried heavier currents, and mechanisms redirected flow automatically. Every adjustment preserved the city's perfection, yet slowly, imperceptibly, the balance leaned toward the unseen weight of the ocean. Canals on the surface mirrored tranquility. Water moved with gentle grace, ripples following a slightly slower pace than before. Marble edges darkened faintly under the denser currents, and reflections lingered, bending and stretching as though time itself had slowed. The subtle change remained unnoticed by the city above, yet it marked an alteration in rhythm, a quiet acknowledgement of forces beyond its control. Cold remained in hidden depths. It crept through lower chambers and channels, chilling stone and water subtly. The effect was imperceptible above ground, yet it influenced the flow of currents and the distribution of pressure. Stone, water, and metal responded in perfect coordination, preserving outward calm while adapting internally. Above, gardens and terraces continued their serene existence. Leaves swayed lightly in the evening air, flowers tilted slowly to catch fading light, and vines traced the stone walls with deliberate, patient arcs. The scent of salt, stone, and greenery carried softly, reinforcing the sense of perfect balance and harmony. The sea outside remained calm, yet insistent. Its surface reflected the twilight sky, smooth and undisturbed, while deep currents pressed quietly against Atlantis' foundations. The ocean moved without urgency, patient and deliberate, waiting for time to complete what force alone could not. Atlantis appeared flawless, serene, and eternal. Yet beneath its calm, pressure lingered, subtle and persistent, an invisible weight that would guide the city toward an inevitable conclusion. Night approached slowly, folding Atlantis into gentle darkness. The sky faded from amber to muted indigo, and the first stars appeared above the city. Crystal lights embedded in terraces and towers began to glow faintly, illuminating streets and canals with soft, steady light. Shadows deepened, embracing the city in calm and quiet order. Below the foundations, persistence took shape. Water continued to press subtly against stone and sediment, redistributed through deep channels that had long lain dormant. Supports flexed ever so slightly, metal joints contracted and expanded, and the mechanisms of Atlantis operated flawlessly to maintain outward perfection. Though invisible to the eye, the foundation shifted imperceptibly toward equilibrium with the ocean's pressure. The canals reflected the faint glow. Water moved smoothly, ripples lingering a moment longer than before. Marble darkened slightly at the edges, capturing the density of flow and returning it in delicate waves. Surface motion remained calm, concealing the quiet persistence beneath. Cold extended through lower chambers. It chilled stone and water in deep passages, subtly influencing the flow above. The city adjusted without awareness, compensating for pressure and cold with perfect, automatic grace. Above ground, life remained serene. Leaves swayed lightly, flowers held their positions, and vines traced gentle paths along terraces and walls. Air carried faint scents of salt, stone, and greenery, blending with the crystal light to preserve the sense of harmony and order. Beyond the walls, the sea pressed with quiet patience. Its surface reflected the night sky, smooth and undisturbed. Deep currents continued their work, pressing gently against foundations, unseen but consistent. Time alone guided the ocean's influence, knowing that it required no haste to achieve what force could not. Atlantis remained flawless, serene, and complete. Yet the quiet persistence of pressure and adjustment continued, invisible, inevitable, and unrelenting, a rhythm beneath the city that would shape the day to come. Night deepened, and Atlantis rested in a quiet glow. Crystal lights cast gentle illumination across terraces, bridges, and canals, highlighting the serene geometry of stone and water. Shadows pooled softly beneath arches and columns, while reflections trembled lightly on the surface of the canals. The city seemed paused, as if holding its breath in stillness. Beneath the city, hidden currents moved. Water pressed through deep chambers, finding paths forged long ago but seldom used. Stone responded by flexing subtly, and sediment shifted beneath the foundations in near imperceptible measures. Metal joints contracted and expanded with precise timing, allowing the city to maintain outward perfection even as internal forces redistributed. The canals mirrored calm and stability. Flow continued along familiar paths, but ripples lingered a moment longer at turns and bends. Marble surfaces absorbed the increased density of water, returning it in gentle, almost imperceptible waves. Above ground, nothing appeared altered, yet the hidden flow was guiding subtle change in rhythm and alignment. Cold persisted in the lower reaches. It moved upward gradually, touching stone and water and altering the weight of currents. The city adapted automatically, balancing stone, water, and metal in a continuous, quiet negotiation. No disturbance was visible, yet the pulse of change moved steadily beneath every surface. Gardens and terraces remained serene. Leaves swayed gently, flowers tilted slowly toward the faint glow, and vines traced graceful arcs along walls. The air carried scents of salt, stone, and greenery, reinforcing the perception of perfect order and timeless calm. The ocean beyond the walls maintained its presence. Its surface mirrored the night sky, smooth and reflective, while deep currents pressed persistently against the foundations. The sea moved with patience and certainty, knowing that time alone would guide the city toward its destiny. Atlantis appeared flawless and eternal above ground. Yet beneath, the hidden flow continued, imperceptible, inevitable, and shaping the city in silence. Late night settled fully over Atlantis. The city glowed softly under crystal lights embedded in terraces and towers. Canals mirrored faint reflections, rippling gently as water moved with measured grace. Shadows pooled beneath arches, bridges, and walls, wrapping the streets in quiet harmony. Everything appeared flawless, serene, eternal. Beneath, the gentle weight pressed on. Pressure in the deepest channels grew subtly, redistributed through stone and sediment alike. Supports flexed minutely, metal joints contracted and expanded, and hidden passages carried water along ancient paths. Atlantis adapted automatically, preserving outward perfection while internal forces aligned slowly with unseen influence. The canals reflected the quiet. Water rippled softly along marble edges, lingering at corners longer than usual. Reflections shifted subtly, bending light and shadow in delicate patterns. The motion above ground seemed unchanged, yet the city carried the weight in its rhythm, absorbed imperceptibly by stone and water alike. Cold persisted in lower chambers. It crept through hidden corridors, subtly altering the density of water and the behavior of currents. Stone and metal responded in precise coordination, maintaining outward calm while internal adjustments continued steadily. Above, gardens and terraces remained peaceful. Leaves swayed gently, flowers tilted slowly toward the faint glow of crystals, and vines traced arcs along walls and railings. The air carried salt, stone, and greenery, blending with light and shadow to preserve the city's serene harmony. The sea beyond the walls waited patiently. Its surface reflected the night sky, smooth and still, while deep currents pressed silently against foundations. Time alone guided the ocean's influence, patient and deliberate, shaping the city beneath its apparent tranquility. Atlantis remained whole and perfect above ground. Yet beneath the calm, the gentle weight continued, invisible, persistent, and inevitable, guiding the city closer to its silent destiny. The night deepened further over Atlantis, and the city seemed suspended in time. Crystal lights glimmered softly across canals, terraces, and towers, illuminating the symmetry of stone and water with gentle grace. Shadows pooled beneath arches and along walls, creating a calm rhythm of light and dark. Canals reflected the faint luminescence, ripples spreading softly as water continued its measured movement. Beneath, the evening lingered in wait. Pressure within deep chambers persisted, pressing subtly against stone and sediment. Supports adjusted minutely, metal components flexed, and hidden channels carried water along long-unused paths. Atlantis adapted mechanically, maintaining outward perfection while internal adjustments continued quietly. Water moved in gentle rhythm. Ripples lingered slightly longer at corners, flowing along marble edges with graceful hesitation. Reflections shimmered softly, bending light in faint patterns imperceptible to the casual observer. Above ground, everything remained calm, yet the city subtly absorbed the pressure below. Cold touched the lower levels lightly. It crept upward through hidden corridors and chambers, affecting the density of water and the flow in deep channels. Stone and metal responded in careful harmony, preserving the serene appearance above while unseen adjustments worked steadily. Gardens and terraces remained still and peaceful. Leaves swayed lightly in the gentle evening air, flowers tilted toward the faint glow, and vines traced arcs along walls. The air carried soft scents of salt, stone, and greenery, enhancing the city's quiet harmony. The sea beyond the walls remained patient. Its smooth surface reflected the night sky, undisturbed by visible movement, while deep currents continued their subtle work beneath. The ocean waited silently, knowing time would complete what force alone could not. Atlantis appeared flawless above ground. Yet beneath, the evening lingered in pressure and adjustment, invisible but inexorable, guiding the city steadily toward the turning of the day. Night deepened over Atlantis, carrying a profound stillness. The crystal lights across terraces and towers glowed softly, illuminating stone and water with gentle precision. Canals reflected the faint luminescence, rippling slightly as currents moved along their familiar paths. Shadows stretched and pooled beneath arches and bridges, wrapping the city in calm serenity. Beneath the surface, the silent shift progressed. Pressure in the deepest chambers pressed slowly against stone and sediment. Supports flexed in barely perceptible measures, and hidden channels carried water along long-forgotten routes. Metal joints contracted and expanded, maintaining alignment while the city adapted automatically. Outwardly perfect, Atlantis bore the invisible weight with quiet dignity. The canals mirrored subtle change. Water moved with delicate hesitation, ripples stretching slightly longer, reflections bending in gentle, almost imperceptible arcs. The surface appeared unchanged, but each ripple carried the faint influence of the shift below. Cold persisted in lower reaches. It crept quietly upward, touching stone and water, subtly altering currents and density. The city responded mechanically, adjusting continuously to preserve the outward calm and order that defined its visible perfection. Above ground, life remained serene. Leaves swayed lightly, flowers tilted with slow precision, and vines traced gentle arcs along walls and terraces. Air carried soft hints of salt, stone, and greenery, reinforcing the sense of harmony. Light and shadow moved in perfect rhythm, unbroken by any sign of disturbance. The sea outside continued its patient work. Its smooth surface reflected the night sky, while deep currents pressed steadily against the city's foundations. The ocean moved without urgency, knowing that time alone would enact the changes that force could not achieve. Atlantis appeared flawless and eternal above ground. Yet beneath, the silent shift continued, invisible, inevitable, and shaping the city in subtle alignment with the forces that had waited patiently for centuries. The late night air carried a profound calm over Atlantis. Crystal lights glimmered softly across terraces, towers, and canals, illuminating the city in gentle warmth. Shadows pooled beneath arches and along bridges, creating a rhythmic interplay of light and dark. Water reflected the glow, rippling smoothly along marble edges as though moved by a careful, deliberate hand. Beneath the city, the undercurrent persisted. Deep channels carried water with quiet insistence, pressing against stone and sediment in barely perceptible shifts. Supports flexed subtly, metal joints contracted and expanded, and hidden passages redirected currents, preserving outward perfection while redistributing pressure internally. Every adjustment was precise, mechanical, and invisible above ground. Canals mirrored the calm and the unseen changes. Water lingered slightly longer at turns and edges, reflections bending gently with the subtle influence below. The motion appeared unchanged to the city's eyes, yet the undercurrent moved steadily, shaping the rhythm of stone and water alike. Cold touched the hidden chambers once more. It moved upward with quiet persistence, chilling stone and water subtly. Currents responded, flowing with altered weight and density. The city absorbed the effect automatically, preserving its serene surface while internal adjustments continued silently. Above, gardens and terraces remained tranquil. Leaves swayed softly, flowers tilted in faint arcs toward the glow of crystals, and vines traced deliberate lines along walls and terraces. The air carried mingled scents of salt, stone, and greenery, blending with reflections and shadows to maintain perfect harmony. The ocean beyond the walls pressed patiently. Its surface remained smooth, mirroring the night sky, while deep currents pressed against the foundations without hurry or force. The sea moved with quiet certainty, knowing that time alone would carry out the changes it had begun. Atlantis remained flawless above ground. Yet beneath, the gentle undercurrent continued, invisible, inevitable, and unrelenting, guiding the city quietly toward the unseen outcome of centuries' wait. The night deepened fully over Atlantis, draping the city in serene darkness. Crystal lights glimmered softly along terraces, bridges, and towers, illuminating the geometry of stone and water without disturbance. Canals reflected the muted glow, ripples flowing slowly, deliberately, along familiar paths. Shadows stretched and pooled beneath arches, creating a calm, uninterrupted rhythm. Beneath the surface, the evening murmured quietly. Pressure pressed through deep channels, flexing stone and sediment with imperceptible force. Supports shifted minutely, metal joints contracted, and hidden waterways carried the increased load, distributing it across the city's foundation. Atlantis adapted mechanically, preserving outward perfection while the hidden murmur adjusted the balance within. Water reflected the subtle shift. Ripples lingered slightly longer at edges, marble darkened faintly, and reflections bent softly, tracing invisible patterns. Though imperceptible to those walking above, the city absorbed the changes internally, every stone and channel responding to unseen guidance. Cold persisted in lower chambers. It rose slowly through hidden passages, chilling water and stone, influencing the flow with subtle insistence. The city responded automatically, aligning stone, metal, and water in quiet harmony, preserving the outward calm above. Above ground, gardens and terraces remained in gentle repose. Leaves swayed lightly, flowers tilted to catch the faint glow, and vines traced soft curves along walls. The air carried hints of salt, stone, and greenery, reinforcing the sense of order, tranquility, and balance that defined Atlantis. The sea beyond remained patient. Its mirrored surface reflected the night sky, undisturbed by wind or wave. Deep currents pressed quietly against foundations, moving with a slow certainty that would require no force to achieve their effect. Time alone guided the ocean's work. Atlantis appeared flawless and eternal. Yet beneath the calm, the evening murmur continued, invisible, inevitable, and persistent, shaping the city in silence, preparing it for the slow turn of history. Night carried Atlantis toward its quietest hour. Crystal lights glimmered faintly across terraces, towers, and canals, illuminating the city in soft, steady radiance. Shadows stretched beneath arches, bridges, and walls, pooling in gentle gradients. Water reflected this muted glow, ripples moving with a careful, unhurried rhythm that mirrored the city's calm. Beneath the surface, subtle shifts continued. Pressure pressed in the deepest chambers, moving stone and sediment in imperceptible measures. Supports flexed minutely, metal joints contracted and expanded with precision, and hidden channels guided water along pathways seldom used. Atlantis responded automatically, preserving the flawless surface above while internal alignment adjusted with quiet determination. Canals mirrored the calm. Water lingered slightly longer at turns, marble darkened faintly under denser flow, and reflections bent in slow, gentle arcs. Everything above ground appeared unchanged, yet the subtle evening shift moved steadily, guiding the city's rhythm below the surface. Cold persisted in hidden depths. It crept upward, chilling stone and water, subtly influencing currents and weight distribution. Stone and metal responded with precise coordination, preserving the outward serenity while internal systems worked continuously to adapt. Above, gardens and terraces remained tranquil. Leaves swayed lightly, flowers tilted toward faint light, and vines traced delicate arcs along walls. The air carried salt, stone, and greenery in a harmonious blend that reinforced the city's calm and order. The sea beyond waited silently. Its surface reflected the night sky, smooth and undisturbed, while deep currents pressed gently against foundations. Patience guided the ocean's influence, knowing that time alone would accomplish what force could not. Atlantis remained flawless above ground. Yet beneath the serene exterior, the subtle evening shift continued, invisible, inevitable, and persistent, guiding the city toward the slow, inevitable unfolding of its destiny. The city of Atlantis rested under the deep night sky. Crystal lights cast gentle illumination across terraces, towers, and canals, giving the stone and water a tranquil glow. Shadows pooled softly beneath arches, bridges, and walls, creating a rhythm of calm across the city. Canals reflected this quiet, rippling gently along familiar paths, mirroring the serenity above. Beneath, the deep night flow persisted. Water pressed subtly through long-forgotten channels, shifting stone and sediment in imperceptible measures. Supports flexed with precision, metal joints contracted and expanded, and hidden passages redirected currents, maintaining perfect outward calm while redistributing pressure internally. The city functioned like a living organism, responding automatically to unseen forces. Ripples traced slow patterns on the surface. Water lingered at edges, marble darkened briefly, and reflections bent gently. Above ground, the motion was imperceptible, yet the flow below continued its quiet work, shaping the city's hidden rhythm and reinforcing its equilibrium. Cold reached the deepest chambers. It crept upward through stone and water, subtly affecting flow and density. Atlantis adjusted automatically, with stone, water, and metal collaborating in silent harmony, maintaining calm above while internal forces aligned gradually. Gardens and terraces remained still. Leaves swayed faintly, flowers tilted toward the soft glow of crystal light, and vines traced slow arcs along walls. The air carried salt, stone, and greenery, blending seamlessly with the reflections and shadows to sustain the city's calm order. The sea beyond the walls waited patiently. Its surface mirrored the night sky, smooth and undisturbed, while deep currents pressed persistently against the foundations. The ocean moved with patience, guided by time, achieving without force what the centuries had arranged. Atlantis appeared perfect above ground. Yet beneath the calm, the deep night flow continued, invisible, inevitable, and relentless, guiding the city quietly toward the slow culmination of centuries' pressures. As the night approached its final hours, Atlantis seemed to pause in quiet anticipation. Crystal lights glimmered softly along terraces and towers, their reflections shimmering gently on the canals. Shadows pooled beneath arches and bridges, creating a rhythmic pattern of dark and light. The city appeared frozen in perfect serenity, timeless and calm. Beneath the surface, silent convergence occurred. Pressure in the deepest chambers shifted subtly, distributing forces across stone, sediment, and metal supports. Hidden channels carried water along long-unused paths, flexing stone with imperceptible precision. Atlantis adapted automatically, preserving outward perfection while internal adjustments moved toward a unified balance dictated by the unseen weight of the ocean. Canals mirrored calm and subtle change. Water ripples lingered slightly longer at corners, marble darkened faintly, and reflections bent slowly, tracing invisible currents below. Above ground, the city seemed untouched, yet every stone and channel responded quietly to the convergence beneath. Cold persisted in hidden depths. It moved upward gradually, chilling stone and water, subtly influencing the flow of currents. The city's mechanisms compensated perfectly, aligning stone, metal, and water in harmony while preserving the serene appearance above. Gardens and terraces remained tranquil. Leaves and flowers shifted ever so slightly, vines traced gentle curves along walls, and the air carried the mingled scents of salt, stone, and greenery. Light and shadow moved in deliberate harmony, maintaining the sense of calm. The sea outside remained patient. Its mirrored surface reflected the night sky, smooth and undisturbed, while deep currents pressed steadily against foundations. Time alone guided the ocean's influence, knowing that the slow convergence below would unfold without haste. Atlantis remained flawless above ground. Yet beneath, the silent convergence continued, invisible, inevitable, and unrelenting, drawing the city subtly toward its ultimate alignment with the forces that had waited patiently for centuries. As the first pale light of dawn approached, Atlantis rested in profound stillness. Crystal lights dimmed gradually, yielding to the faint hues of morning that stretched across terraces, towers, and canals. Shadows receded gently, leaving stone and water bathed in soft, muted colors. The city appeared perfect, serene, and timeless, as if it had been waiting for centuries for this moment of quiet reflection. Beneath the city, all forces converged. Pressure in deep chambers reached equilibrium, water settled into long-forgotten channels, and sediment shifted minutely to accommodate the weight above. Metal joints contracted and expanded with delicate precision, and stone flexed ever so slightly, embracing the total alignment dictated by the ocean. Atlantis adapted automatically, every mechanism working in harmony to maintain balance at the final hour of night. Canals mirrored the subtle calm. Water flowed evenly, ripples tracing gentle paths along marble edges. Reflections lingered, bending softly in the faint morning glow, capturing the essence of time itself. Above ground, nothing appeared changed, yet the city carried the quiet history of centuries within its stones and waters. Cold remained in the deepest chambers. It lingered softly, touching stone and water, adding weight to the stillness. Currents moved deliberately, slow and silent, as if aware that every shift had already played its part. The city absorbed it, graceful and composed, untouched by awareness, yet fully alive in its own internal rhythm. Gardens and terraces awaited the dawn. Leaves swayed faintly, flowers tilted gently toward the first light, and vines traced arches and walls in harmony. The air was calm, carrying subtle scents of salt, stone, and greenery. Every element of Atlantis existed in perfect alignment, serene and timeless. The sea beyond mirrored the morning sky. Its surface remained smooth, reflective, and patient, pressing gently against foundations with the knowledge that time alone had achieved what force could not. The ocean had guided, the city had adjusted, and now both rested together in quiet equilibrium. Atlantis stood flawless. Stone, water, gardens, and terraces remained perfect above ground, serene and eternal. Beneath the surface, every pressure, shift, and adjustment had concluded, leaving the city in final harmony with the sea. The legend of Atlantis lived in the stillness, a story of beauty, balance, and silent endurance, a city resting in the quiet embrace of its own eternity.